Hi there, my name is Irene, and in today's video, we're going to learn how to import CAD references into SketchUp. We're also going to discuss some considerations to keep in mind, as well as how to work with those references once we bring them into SketchUp. So let's get to it. Alright, so before we can start working in SketchUp, let's take a look at the reference that we're going to be working with. You don't need to do this. You don't need to have AutoCAD or whatever other software it is that the reference is made in order to be able to bring that reference into SketchUp. But it is helpful to have access to the software because that way you can verify certain information and confirm that your import has been done successfully. So this is the file that we're going to be importing here today. And as you can see, it's a floor plan. It has some text information. It has some dimensions. Most importantly, I want to point out the fact that it is set up in metric millimeter. So just wanted to show that in. Now let's get into SketchUp. So here is my SketchUp homepage, and the first thing that we're going to be doing is choosing the template. Now today I want to demonstrate how we can import a CAD reference in two scenarios. One is where the SketchUp file is set up with the same unit system as the reference CAD, and the other scenario is going to be if you're working with a different unit system than the CAD reference. So let's start with same. So for this, I'm going to be choosing the simple meters. Millimeters and meters are the same thing. So we are starting with our SketchUp file. I'm going to get rid of this lady here. And because I'm going to be importing a floor plan, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be moving my standard view to top. Remember, if you're working in 2D, you set up a standard 2D view. Now, importing in SketchUp is relatively easy. The developers of SketchUp did a very good job creating as many options for importing into SketchUp as possible, and AutoCAD files are one of those options. So if you want to import an AutoCAD file into SketchUp, all you need to do is go to File and then Import. Now, once your browser window shows, what you're going to see is that only the formats that are able to be imported in SketchUp will be visible. And if you're not sure what formats can be imported into SketchUp, one very easy way to verify this information is by going here on the bottom right corner and expanding it. And what I want you to notice is that SketchUp actually allows for a bunch of different formats. So you can import both 2D and 3D. You can import images, Photoshop files. It actually gives you a lot of options when it comes to importing. But for the time being, I'm just going to leave it in all supported files. Now, I'm going to select the file that I'm going to be importing. Now, before I hit the import button, I want to click these options here to highlight some important information. Now, the options here for the import will vary depending on what format you're importing. You can see that this is the one specifically for AutoCAD. And the one thing that I want to highlight here is the scale. So by default, your importing scale in SketchUp is set up to model units. So this basically means that because SketchUp is a unit-based software, SketchUp is going to take whatever units the imported file is set up to, and it will convert them to whatever your SketchUp file is. So if your AutoCAD file has been properly set up, you can just leave the model units here. And what should happen is that when you import that AutoCAD file, it should come to the proper scale, regardless of whether you're working with the same unit system or you're working with a different unit system. So I'm going to leave it as model units format, and I'm going to click OK. Now we're going to click Import, and we're going to give it a second, and we're going to get this window. So this window is basically giving us a recap of the import results. And what I want to highlight here is that when you're moving information from one file format to another, there's always the chance that there will be information that is not imported. You can actually see here that when we imported this AutoCAD file into SketchUp, dimensions, text, and some blocks have been ignored. So this is not just going to happen when you're importing AutoCAD into SketchUp. This is going to happen anytime that you import from any format of a software to any other form, because you need to consider software almost as languages like English, Spanish, Chinese, Russian. Some languages have more things in common, and some languages have less things in common. So what's going to happen is that when you're moving information from one format to another, you're basically translating that information, and some languages may not have the same words. So you can almost consider AutoCAD to SketchUp as, I don't know, like Spanish to French. So just keep that into consideration, and we're going to click Close. What you can see here is that immediately what we see in SketchUp is not exactly the same that we had in AutoCAD. Most obvious is the fact that all of my annotations are missing. My dimensions, my tags, all of that stuff is gone because SketchUp does not recognize it. But also my layer colors. All of my lines in SketchUp are white. Now, fortunately, layers do come into SketchUp, and you can find them as tags. Now, we're going to spend the whole video talking about tags, But for the time being, the only thing that you need to concern yourself with is that tags in SketchUp are AutoCAD layer. So if you want to verify your tags, you can do so in the default tray. Now, if you're starting with a default template, you should have the tags loaded here, and all you have to do is expand them. But if you do not see your tag window, remember, all you have to do is go Window, Default Tray, and then find your tags. So as you can see here, all of your AutoCAD layers have been converted into tags, and you can basically turn them on and off the same way that you would do in AutoCAD. You can actually see that the color has been brought in. It's just that lines don't show colors based on tags in SketchUp the same way that they would do in AutoCAD. Another important thing to highlight is the fact that when your CAD is imported into SketchUp, SketchUp groups it into a single component. This is a good thing. We do not want to mess up with this. I will talk a little bit later about why. So now, before I start drawing or modeling or doing anything, a very important step that you need to take is make sure that your CAD reference has been imported correctly. And by this, I mean that it is to scale. This is super important. The amount of times that I've seen people import a CAD reference, start modeling, they spend like an hour working on it, and then they go to do something and they realize that the dimensions are not working, the math ain't mathing, is astounding. So before you spend any amount of time modeling using this reference, you want to make sure that this reference is actually the correct scale. So to verify this, we're going to use one of my favorite tools, which is the measuring tape. Now the measuring tape can be found on the large tool set here. It's this guy over here. And the quick key is T. Now, the measuring tape is the go. It's incredible. It does everything. It has so many functions, and we will see all of them. But for the time being, we're only going to be using it to measure distances. Now, there's two different ways that you can measure a distance within a SketchUp model using the measuring tape. One is if you are just clicking on 2 points. So let's say that, for example, I don't know, I want to measure the distance between these two columns. So I can click on the first inference point, and then I can bring my measuring tape to the second point. I do not need to click. You can see that I have not clicked on anything. I'm just hovering over that second inference point, and you can see that it is telling me that dimension. So that is if there is no actual line to measure. The other option is if you have a line that you can measure. So for example, let's say that I want to know the dimensions of this column here. The column is already drawn. So all I need to do is put my measuring tape over one of those segments, and then it will tell me the length of that segment. Because remember, in SketchUp, you're working with raw geometry. So you have lines, you have faces, and the measuring tape here is just telling me the length of that one individual line, okay? So it's telling me that it's 0.30, which is 300 millimeters. And if I come to my reference AutoCAD, you can see that it is 300 millimeters, which means that my drawing is to scale. Awesome, fantastic. So I could start working on this drawing as is. We're good to go. Now, before I move forward, what I want to do is I want to discuss the other possible scenario, which is what happens if you're working with a different unit system. So let's say that this project is actually supposed to be set up in Imperial. I'm working with feet and fractional inches, but my reference is metric. So the important thing to know is that you do not need to do anything to the original file. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to undo. So Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Basically, I want to get rid of my imported file. And what I'm going to do is, remember, if you want to change the unit system of your SketchUp file, all you need to do is go to Window, Model Info, and then Units. We're going to go for Architectural, which is feet and fractional inches by default. You can even choose the precision. For the time being, I'm going to leave it at 0. I don't want my units to get too messy. I can always change this afterwards. So I'm going to click OK. Now we're going to import again. So I'm going to go File, and then I'm going to go Import, and I'm going to select exactly the same file as before. I'm going to go to Options, and again, I'm going to leave it at Model Units. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click Import. And now I'm going to click Close, and there is my file. So once again, you cannot just assume that the file is to scale. Don't do that. Don't trust the machines. They're not your friends. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our measuring tape to verify the dimensions. Because we're converting from metric to imperial, you're not going to get the exact number. There's always some rounding that is being done, especially because I've set up that I don't want any fractions. I want to round up to 0 inches. So in this case, it is helpful to know what are the conversion rates. So 300 millimeters is about 12 inches. It's about a foot. Not exactly, but close enough. So what I'm going to be doing here is bringing up again my measuring tape, and I'm going to put it on the same edge. And it is telling me that it is about 1 feet, 12 inches, 300 millimeters. the good news about drawings coming or not coming to scale is that if your drawing is not to scale, it's going to be super obvious. So it's not like, oh, it was supposed to be 1 feet and it's actually like 1 feet and 1 inch. Usually, if your drawing is not to scale, it's going to be something like, oh, it was supposed to be 1 feet and it's actually like 15 feet, or it's like 1/4 of an inch. It's usually going to be a very dramatic difference. So luckily, that means that if your drawing is not to scale, it's going to be very, very obvious, but you still want to verify. Well, so lucky with this one. The CAD drawing was set up properly, which meant that when I left my SketchUp importing options in model units, SketchUp was able to convert the AutoCAD file from millimeters into feet and inches. But you're not always going to be this lucky. Like, AutoCAD users is the Wild West, and some people do not understand how unit systems work in AutoCAD. So depending on what you're importing, sometimes you're going to bring in a file and you're going to notice that no matter what you do, the model units don't seem to work. SketchUp just doesn't understand what it is supposed to do. So what do we do in those cases? Well, in those cases, you can manually override the unit system that your CAD references will be imported in. So we're going to go back to File, Import, back to select our file, and Options. And what we're going to do here, and this is very important to understand, is we're going to set up what units the reference is. SketchUp knows what SketchUp is. You don't need to tell SketchUp that SketchUp is set up in meters or millimeters or feet and inches. SketchUp knows what it is. SketchUp is having a hard time understanding what the other file is supposed to be. So if my original AutoCAD file was set up in millimeters, that is what I'm going to be setting up here. If my original CAD file would be set up in feet and inches, then that's what I would put here. So very important to understand. When you're setting up the scale units to import a reference, what you're setting up is what the units of the original file are. So I can come here, say that the file is supposed to be millimeters, click OK, click Import, and once again, if I come here and I verify with my measuring tape, it's going to tell me, yeah, it's about 1 feet. So again, this file was good. So I didn't really need to do this, but I think it's quite important to show this because, again, I've worked with AutoCAD references long enough to tell you that they're not always that good. You're not always that lucky. Now, other things to take into consideration are going to be the placement point. It's just being placed very close to the origin, which is great. I like that. But what's going to happen is that sometimes when you import CAD files, they're going to be like all over the place. Like they're usually on the upper right quadrant. And the reason for that is because of the way that different programs work with origins. So origins are going to be basically the 0, 0 point of your axis, or 0, 0 if we're talking about 2D. So the thing is that usually when you're working in SketchUp, you're going to want to remain as close as possible to the origin. Not doing this can sometimes cause some performance issues. But the thing is that in AutoCAD, people usually don't care about the origin. In fact, if I go back to my original CAD drawing, and I go, for example, let's say line, and I go 0, 0 to find the origin, you're going to see that the origin is not even touching the property. So this is something important to consider. If your SketchUp file, when it is important, it is thrown away very far from the origin, you want to bring it close to the origin. So to do that, you can just select the component, go M for move, pick it up, and then bring it to the origin. Again, this is not mandatory, but you're going to see that especially when you start doing things like zoom in or zoom extend, having your model as close as possible to the origin will make things easier for you in the long term. Another important consideration, which I think I mentioned lightly, but now I'm going to repeat, is matching the kind of reference to the standard view. So here I'm working with a floor plan, and because of that, I set up my standard view as a top view. But especially when you're working with CAD references, sometimes the reference is going to be an elevation or a section. In those cases, you're going to want to make sure that you are setting up the standard view to align with that kind of drawing. Now let's talk a little bit about why it is so important to be able to import CAD references into SketchUp. So this has to do with what kind of information we're given. Because especially if you work in interior design, you're never really going to be working in isolation. It's never like you're given like, oh, just design anything for any space. No, you're usually given a scope of work, which is usually the architectural space within which you will design. The building can be existing, or it can be a new construction. It could be halfway built, or it could be still in the design stages. But you're always going to be working with a scope, with a delimitation, with a shell. And we need to bring that shell into SketchUp to draw it so we can make our design within that boundary. Now, unfortunately, in interior design, depending on how lucky you are, you may get that reference information in different formats, going from less lucky to most lucky. So if you're very, very unlucky, there's no information. And then you have to go on site with a measuring tape, pen and paper, and then you have to do your own plans, take your own dimensions, and basically start from scratch. If you're a little bit luckier, the client may have existing drawings. Now, the quality of those existing drawings can be anywhere on the spectrum. It could be original paper drawings that then you have to scan, or it could be PDFs. It could be drawings that don't actually reflect the existing as-built state of the building, or they might be perfectly accurate drawings. It's a little bit of a gamble when you're working with image references or PDF references. We're going to see why a little bit later. A quite common scenario is that either the client or some of the other consultant involved will have CAD drawings. So whether it's Autocad or any other format, they will have something like this. Now, the reason that this is a great scenario is because when you import CAD into SketchUp, the CAD drawing is going to come as a vector line. If you're not familiar with what vector lines are, basically it means that instead of your lines being accounted as pixels, your lines are accounted as actual information. So you have point A, you have point B, and then a line is created between them. And the reason that this is so very important is because when you're working with vectors, vectors have inference points and lines. So for example, if I activate, let's say my line command with key L, and I bring it to my CAD drawing, you're going to see that I can find endpoints. I can find, for example, midpoints. I can be on edge. So this is going to make it much easier to work with this reference. If we would be working with an image or PDF, that information, that floor plan would have come as pixels, and pixels are not inferences. So again, we're going to actually see that in a later video, and you will see just how frustrating it is to work with reference images. The best case scenario would be if either the client or some of the consultants have an actual 3D model. Now, this is very unlikely, and sometimes even if they have a 3D model, they will not share it for reasons that escape me. So a lot of times you're going to be working with a reference CAD drawing, but sometimes you're going to get the short end of the stick and you're going to be working either with images or nothing at all. So let's just all be grateful that CAD references exist. And with that, we have reached the end of this video. What's going to happen is that in the next video, we're going to actually start modeling using that reference as our base. So stay tuned for when that video comes out. Otherwise, if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like, give it a share. You can also subscribe. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.